I'm Dan Erlewine, and welcome to the latest Stewart MacDonald video, Vintage Gibson Flat Tops. Like this 1944 J45 that belongs to me. We're going to see a lot of guitars on this tape. We're going down south to Asheville, North Carolina to meet Gary Burnett from B3 Vintage Guitars. I'm going down with Eldon Whitford from Reed City, Michigan, an old picking buddy of mine that's writing a book on the history of the Gibson flat top guitar from the 1930s through the 1950s. Gary Burnett is an authority on Gibson flat tops and has a beautiful collection of guitars like this late 1930s J35, one of the biggest sounding guitars ever made. Gary has also been a consultant to the Gibson Company out in Montana, where he's talked with Ren Ferguson. Ren's been in charge of bringing out all the limited editions and the reissues, like this 1991 Cherry Burst J45. It's a beauty. The Cherry Burst was first done in the late 30s, but I've never seen one. I've always seen the darker ones like this. Rumor has it that Gary has an original Cherry Burst, and we're going to see that when we get down there.
I'd like to welcome you, the viewers, Dan and Eldon, to my home. And if you're ready, we'll get started. Dan, I'd like to start with this 1937 J35. J meaning jumbo, that's the size. 35 meaning it cost $35 in 1937. And this is the way it sounds. It's a killer.
What I'm curious about, Gary, is the sunburst on this one. It's beautiful. Is that typical of that era?
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, Gibson used a sunburst on most of their instruments during that period.
Gary, yesterday we looked at several jumbo Gibsons, which is the first big Gibson made. How does the J35 differ from that jumbo? What are some of the features that you look for to differentiate between the two?
To start off with, there are several differences between the two guitars. The sunbursts are totally different. On top, they're similar, but the 1934-35 jumbos have a much smaller sunburst on top. The back and sides on the jumbo have a sunburst finish. Sides and the back, where the J35 is finished in a reddish tint. Also, getting back to the front, we'll go to the headstock. The J35 has white silkscreen logo. And of course, the jumbo has Gibson written in pearl. The tuners on the J35, there are 3 in line on planet gears. A jumbo, they have a more expensive type tuners, which are called the Grover G98s. And another one of the things that are different, the J35 has a larger sound hole, which is 4 inches, as opposed to the jumbo, which is 3 3/4 inches, I think.
Gary will be looking at some of your jumbos in a few minutes and looking at some of those differences that you've just mentioned between that, which was the first large Gibson flat top, and these J35s. You pointed out the sunburst. Dan, maybe you can show a picture of the different sunburst on these, the different finishes. What do you see as the typical J35 finish?
According to the shipping records I have from Gibson, the dark sunbursts are apparently the most plentiful.
I heard that Gibson lost their records from the 30s in a fire. How did you happen to get these shipping records?
A friend of mine, Julius Belson, who worked with Gibson for many years and who is also a Gibson historian, compiled that for me several years ago. My personal experience has been I see more of the natural finished Gibsons as opposed to the sunburst. But now getting over here to the Cherry Burst, that is a rare one. I've only seen 2 of those in my entire life. If you notice the pick guards on these guitars, they're absolutely beautiful. This one in particular is my favorite because the grain runs in the direction of the pick. Now on these other 3, you can see that the grain run in the opposite direction. but they're still beautiful in the fact that they look like they're on fire. It's like flames to me.
When we looked at these guitars yesterday, we noticed some differences, particularly in the neck, the shape of the neck, the contour of the heel, and the tuners were different. Gary, can you show us some of these differences and maybe tell us how they came about to be different or the errors with them?
The truth is, Gibson was inconsistent with the tuners that they used. Now let's talk about the tuners. There are 4 different kinds on these guitars. Starting with this particular one, it has the open back Clouson tuners, and if you'll notice that they have some little etching on the outer edges.
Which guitar is that, Gary?
That happens to be the 1939 Natural Finish, J35. This one also has open back Clousons, and this one is on the Cherry Burst J35, and it is also a 1939.
What brand are those?
Clousons. This is one of the 1937 J35s, and it has the earlier version of the open back Clouson tuners. You'll notice that instead of having any scalloping on the top or on the bottom, they're just squared off.
That's a Sunburst, right?
Yes, this is a Sunburst model. The last 1937 Sunburst J35 has Grover open back 3 on a Planet tuners. And one of the things, distinctive features about this particular one, the scalloping on the top of the tuner appears to be very similar to the peghead on the top of the Gibson.
Now, do you think, Gary, that they made them specifically for Gibson, or was that just chance?
I honestly don't know.
The serial number on the this 1939 blonde face one is on the back of the peg head, and we don't see that on the other 3. Can you tell us why that is?
Yes, I can. Gibson started stamping the serial number in the back of the peg head in 1939. If you'll notice on this other 39, it's not in the peg head there, but it's an early 39. Now the neck on this blonde one happens to be smooth as opposed to some of the others which have a V shape. If you'll also notice, the heel is very rounded and wide. On this other 39, the one with the Cherry Burst has a French heel, much more narrow. Now this neck has more of a V in it as opposed to the other one, which is more rounded. This is on the 1937 J35.
Gary, we mentioned the Jumbo Gibson, which is the first large flat top that Gibson made. And we have an example of a Gibson Jumbo right here in my right hand. We also have the J35, which we've been looking at in my left hand. Can you point out some of the differences in that evolution of these 2 guitars?
I'd be glad to. Let's look at the sunburst on the guitars. Take, for instance, this 1935 Jumbo has a much smaller burst than the 1937 J35. The earlier the burst, the smaller. Then as the years went by, Gibson sunburst got bigger and bigger and bigger. And we'll look at the sound hole that we were talking about a while ago. The sound hole in the J35 is 4 inches from this point to this point. The Jumbo is 3 7/8 inches. So it's actually a smaller sound hole than in the J35. And then look at the fingerboard. The J35 has a bound fingerboard, where there's no such thing on the 35. Then going on up the fingerboard, we'll go to the peg heads. The Jumbo has pearl script. The J35 has white silkscreen. The Jumbo is a more expensive guitar. It has more expensive features. Let's turn the guitar sideways and we'll look at the bodies. The Jumbo has a sunburst sides. It doesn't have it on the J35. Let's go ahead and turn them all the way around to the back. Now, even though there's similarities in the body shapes of the guitars, the Jumbo has a sunburst back, non-sunburst on the J35. Let's look at the heel on the Jumbo. The heel is very narrow. This is called a French heel. Now let's go to the other guitar. On the J35, the heel is much wider. and is more rounded. The necks on these guitars are V-shaped. The J35 has 3 on a plate open back Grover tuners. On the Jumbo, these are the open back G98 tuners, which are more expensive than the others. On the sides of these guitars, you're going to notice quite a difference as far as the depth of the guitars go. The Jumbo is just as thick at one end as it is on the other. On the J35, however, you'll notice it's more narrow at this end as it is at the bottom end where it's wider. Now when I say taper on that Jumbo, that's only with the eye. Actually, between this point and this point, there is a 1/4 inch difference. On this one, there's a full inch difference between this point and this point. Gibson built the Jumbos in 1934, 35, and very possibly early 36. This particular one is a 1935. This is also the original hardshell case for it.
You're hitting your B and your E, though. I think that this one might have I'll try the E.
Hey Gary, hold that body up so I can see that sunburst from the back. Rotate that baby real nice and slow so we can see it. It's quite...
As we leave the 1930s and go into the 40s, Gibson dropped the J35 line and added the J45 and the Southern Jumbo in 1942. This is what we're going to call the next generation.
Gary, would you show us the difference between the J45 and the Southern Jumbo?
Certainly. Let's start with the J45. It has a narrow bridge, which is of a rectangular shape. Moving on up, you've got a simple binding around the sound hole. The binding around the body is certainly simple, just one piece, white piece. Then coming on up the fingerboard, you've got dot inlays.
Mm-hmm.
Then on the Southern Jumbo, you have the split parallelogram inlays.
Yeah.
Much fancier binding around the edge of the guitar. Fancier rosette material. Then of course you have the belly bridge, which is a little fancier also.
We're looking at a silkscreen banner on this era Gibson's. Gary, can you tell us more about that?
Yes. Gibson introduced this banner, Only Gibson is Good Enough, in 1942, and it ran through 1946.
Gary, I noticed the two guitars on the left don't have a banner on the peg head. What's the story?
Gibson removed the banner in 1946 and kept the script logo through 1948, of which I don't have any. Then, this 49 and this 51 Southern Jumbo has the block inlay, which started in 1949.
We're going to take these guitars one at a time and show you some of the special features and also take it in chronological order. This 1942 Southern Jumbo is special because of the rosewood back and sides. Highly rare, and probably only the very first Southern Jumbos had rosewood back and sides. We're looking at the rear belly bridge that Gibson designed. It's beautifully sculpted, as you can see, which is typical of that. Move ahead a little bit and you see the pickguard using the same material that Gibson used in the 30s with the wide stripes, but using a different design.
What year is this Southern Jumbo, Gary?
1942.
42. It's a beauty.
This SJ has the typical multiple stripes of binding. Another feature of the early Southern Jumbos is this white heel cap. These early Southern Jumbos did not have neck binding. That wasn't the feature that showed up until about 1946. But you notice it does have real pearl inlays, which disappeared later. Gibson switched to pearloid in the late 1940s. Another feature that disappeared in the late 40s was this beautiful tapered peghead. We're looking at a 1943 Southern Jumbo, and Gary had mentioned earlier that many of the Southern Jumbos have the rear belly bridge. However, many of them also have the rectangular bridge that's seen always on the J45s. We want to show this guitar because it's got the black stripe up the middle, which is a painted-on stripe under the lacquer, sometimes referred to as the skunk stripe. Decorative only. We show you also in a minute the same stripe on a J45. Now this is a J45, and it also has the painted-on decorative stripe. Even though this guitar does not have a serial number, it's probably about a 1943, the same as the Southern Jumbo that we just looked at. We're looking again at this first Southern Jumbo skunk stripe. I'm going to turn it around, and it also has the black stripe down the back, which is fairly typical of Southern Jumbos. Gary, this J45 is not typical. Can you tell me anything about why that is?
Yes, during World War II, there was a short supply on wood at the Gibson Company because they were working in part with the war effort. And during that time, when they ran out of mahogany, they started using parts on hand, and some of it was using maple for back and sides on some of the J45s. Like on this one here. Dan, you might want to move a little closer to get a better shot. Now, what do you think of the grain of the wood, Dan? Let me turn it so you can see yourself in it.
Boy, you can. You must polish these things all the time.
Religiously, once a year. This is one of 3 that I have, or I sold the other 2, and this one is not for sale.
We're looking at a 1942 J45 that does not have a truss rod. Due to the war, Gibson was not able to get metals and was short on supplies, and so they made a decision to not put truss rods in their instruments. In fact, they sent letters to the stores indicating they wouldn't have truss rods in their guitars any longer throughout the war. That didn't prove to be the case, however. It's just 1942 and early 1943 that some were without. Some during that time did have truss rods from spare parts.
I'd like to add also that the ones that didn't have the truss rod, they had an ebony strip in place of that to help strengthen the neck to keep it from warping. Now, according to Julius Spelson of Gibson, during that time he said that they didn't consider that Gibson quality, so later in '43 they did start adding the metal truss rod again. This is a rosewood model Southern Jumbo 1942. This is a J45 1942. This is a skunk striped J45 1943. This is a J45 maple back and sides 1943. This is a skunk stripe Southern Jumbo 1943. This is a J45 1944.
That's mine.
This is a 1949 Southern Jumbo. And this is a 1951 Southern Jumbo. These guitars are so gorgeous. What do
They
you think?
sure are. You got us convinced. Now we're going to go on to something else, aren't we, Gary?
I think we will. What, do you want to go to the J55s next?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. These next instruments are unique to the Gibson line. They were built between 1938 and 1941. They're called J55s. 55 meaning they cost $55 new. Essentially, they're high-grade J35s, meaning they have more ornamentation than what the J35s had. Note the stair-step peg head. This is one of the earliest designs for the J55 in 1939 and 40. Then we have a bound fingerboard, which the fingerboard is made of genuine polished coffee wood. Moving on down the guitar, we'll notice that it has a gorgeous pick guard of that era, which is somewhat different than the J35s, but nevertheless it's still a very beautiful piece. And on down the instrument, you'll notice that the genuine polished coffee wood bridge is very similar to the J200 guitars of that era. If you notice, the coffee wood is so dark you would almost think it was ebony. It has a very, very dark brown hue to it. Notice the individual Clouson tuners with the amber buttons. Then if you look closer, you can see just how the pig head is really stair-stepped nicely. I'd also like to show you that during the 40s, Gibson had a very fat logo with their script.
In pearl, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Eldon, tell us some of the differences in this other J55.
Well, this is a 1941, which is the last year that the J55s are produced. The previous peg head we looked at was 1940 and was stair step. The script was higher on that one, so they moved it down. And this is a pretty typical 1941 J55, and like many manufacturers, they looked for ways of producing their instrument or their product easier. Look at this fingerboard here, which is probably a Cromwell fingerboard. Cromwell was an individual that marketed guitars, and Gibson made instruments for him. These were less expensive guitars. Gary and I have speculated, and this is speculation, that this is a way of making this look fancy while keeping the production costs down. In addition to that, they've changed the bridge, and that bridge is identical to the earlier Ray Whitley Recording King bridges, which also was a lesser expensive guitar that Gibson made for other marketers. So that is a way of producing this guitar for probably less money for them and still making a fancy J55.
Ellen, you did so well on that one. How about telling us a little bit about the last one?
Well, this is a good transition guitar between the two. You'll note that this peg head is identical to the 1941 J55. And going on down the guitar, the bridge that's used and the fingerboard that's used is again the polished coffee wood that was like on the earlier with the mustache bridge.
Note the red line on the lid of the original hard shell case. That's a beautiful match, isn't it, Ellen?
It sure is. So far we've been listening to Gary Burnett, collector of Gibson flat top guitars, old ones, beautiful ones, talk about his instruments. Now we're going to listen to King Gary, king of the advanced jumbo, talk about his fiefdom.
These are the last of the jumbo guitars that we're going to be talking about tonight. These are advanced jumbos, the true kings, the best acoustic guitars Gibson ever built in their entire history.
Gary, what is there about these guitars that make them Gibson's best?
Try beating that. This is the loudest and sweetest guitar I've ever played.
I agree with you, Gary. It's a killer guitar. Tell us why it sounds like that.
There are several reasons this guitar sounds great. First of all, it has an Adirondack spruce top with Brazilian rosewood back and sides. Some of the other reasons that make this guitar great are, well, it's got scallop braces. It has a long scale. That means it has 25 1/2 inches between the saddle and the nut. I sent this guitar off to Gibson so that they could use it to copy their new reissues that they're doing today. And they are great guitars too. And Ren Ferguson at Gibson informed me that this top was hand-tuned.
Gary, how many pre-war advanced jumbos do you own?
At this time, I only have 7. But I also have 2 prototypes that Gibson built me last year, and they are great guitars.
I love this Diamond and Arrows fingerboard that Gibson used on their advanced jumbos. This was the only guitar that they put this fingerboard on. Notice the sunburst heel. On all of the advanced jumbos that we've seen, they've all had sunburst heels.
This is another advanced jumbo. Notice that it has a larger sunburst than the other. The year for this one is 1938, and that's typical for that year. This particular one has a beautiful pickguard on it.
Man, this is a beauty. The main reason I got involved with this shoot here is because I wanted to get my hands on them, of course. But I wanted you to see the colors in these sunbursts. I've never seen anything like it. Let's hear a bit about this one, Gary.
Dan, the one you like is a 1936 Nick Lucas Special. One of the special features about this guitar is that it has maple back and sides. Isn't she a beauty? The one to my right here is a Century of Progress made in 1936. This guitar was introduced in 1933 for the World's Fair in Chicago. Some of the features it has is it has a perlwood overlay in the headstock and the fingerboard. It also has back and sides made out of maple, such as the Nick Lucas Special had.
Here we have a 1939 L Series Gibson. This body style was made from the late 20s until the early 40s. And when it first was introduced, it was Gibson's largest guitar. The L Series included the L1, the LO, and the LOO. It sometimes was finished in this ebony color, and sometimes was seen in sunburst. It just depended on the year that it was produced. This is an inexpensive guitar and sold anywhere from $25 to $35. We want you to see this particular guitar up close to show you the beautiful ebony finish that's on it. Also unusual about this guitar, most of the black ones had white pickguards. This one has that beautiful flame celluloid. Of course, it's black all over. They call it their ebony finish. Also, this guitar has better quality Kluson tuners than was normally seen on this model, and had amber tuning buttons as opposed to the white or black that usually came on them. In 1939, when this guitar was made, it was the least expensive Gibson flat top you could buy. Today, this guitar would be considered a professional quality instrument. I'd like to introduce you to Nick Lucas.
Hi, Nick.
And also some features on this beautiful instrument. This guitar has the highly desirable red spruce top. Everybody's trying to find red spruce right now and having a hard time doing it. Also, the fingerboard and bridge is Brazilian rosewood. The ribs on this are made from flat sawn Michigan curly maple. They're beautiful. The back is one-piece curly maple. What more could you ask for in an instrument? This guitar has a pearl script as well as a beautifully cut pearl fleur-de-lis. The inlay pattern and the fingerboard, you may recognize some of these from the Gibson banjos of the day. Now we have the Century guitar, which is very similar to the Nick Lucas we just looked at. Has the same features, red spruce top, flat sawn Michigan curly maple sides, curly maple back, Brazilian bridge. This guitar also has fancy celluloid fingerboard overlay and peghead overlay, commonly referred to as mother of toilet seat.
The tuners on the Century of Progress guitar are open back G98 Grovers. Notice the white buttons. They are very similar to the tuners which are on the Nick Lucas Special. They are also the open back G98s with the metal tuners, metal buttons.
The Century of Progress has the celluloid overlay with then rosewood pieces inlaid into that with mother of pearl inlaid into the rosewood. This is one of the patterns that was used on the Century of Progress.
Well, I'd like to thank Bonnie and Gary Burnett for letting us into their house for 2 days and putting up with us till, geez, 2:30 in the morning, and especially Eldon Whitford for putting this together, inviting me down to North Carolina and calling the Burnetts and setting this up, and be looking for Eldon's book on the history of the Gibson flat top guitar coming out in about 3 years from now. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Bonnie. Thanks, Eldon.
Dan, we enjoyed having you at Eldon both.
So long.
Adios.